Don't you find it interesting that sometimes there's just a simple word or phrase that has so much power that it changes the entire arc of the public discourse on the subject? We saw it with fake news. We saw it with "Let's Go Brandon." We saw it with "Epstein didn't kill himself." And what we are seeing in action, I've made the case in several videos on this subject, is turning words. Words or phrases that dispel delusion, or literal words of power. These are words that ride that razor's edge where rhetoric meets dialectic. Or put another way, where the sloganeering meets the entirety of a coherent, complete argument summed up in a tight, succinct linguistic package that can be delivered like a guided missile into the midst of a political discussion and cause disarray and panic among your foes. Now, it is a weapon, if you will, or a tool of good. It relies on truth. It cannot be astroturfed. It cannot be forced into being through massive amounts of money or influencers pushing it into the public consciousness. It takes on a life of its own. It's a light and darkness sort of thing. And there's really only one way to tell if you have a good turning word, and that's to A/B test it, to try it out in the real world. And you can kind of tell when you're over the target by how much screaming you hear. And judging by that, the latest term, groomer, is a resounding success. In fact, it may be the first successful pushback against the LGBTQ movement that the quote-unquote right has had ever. And you can see this by the reaction here on Reddit. The groomer slur, we'll talk about that in a second, banned on Reddit in bid to tackle hate speech, your move, Twitter. Now, a slur, when you look at, say, the queen mother of all slurs, is a play on the Spanish word for black, and it's focused on something you can't change, an appearance. Groomer, that's a behavior. That's something you do have control over. So labeling it a slur, kind of just it's kind of a jumping ahead in line there. That hasn't been established. In fact, I don't think it's true at all. But anyway, what I think's happening is it's hitting a little close to home because, as at least some people have made the argument, they're not born, they're made. And there's some high-profile celebrities that can kind of attest to this. Marie Osmond was all kinds of screwed up after something happened to her. Anderson Cooper had some sort of dark skeletons in his past. And even the far-right provocateur, Milo Yiannopoulos, told some pretty disturbing stories about parties he went to in Hollywood. I don't know about you, but I've never been to a party with very young boys running around. In fact, if I did, I would probably leave or call the police. But apparently, in Hollywood, you just party on. So here they immediately identify it as a vile slur. Okay, game on. It identifies the community with the P. Well, there's been some pretty creepy stories. I'm not the monster, you're the monster pops into mind immediately. And minor attracted persons. There's been agitation for a certain amount of normalization. Not to mention the sex education we're seeing, or what passes for it, for kindergartners learning all sorts of explicitly descriptive acts, which you don't need to know. You don't need to teach. And in a lot of ways, I'm kind of going back to the sex ed belongs with the parents. So Reddit's now not only going to enforce its policy on the groomer word, it's anyone that talks about the T as a mental illness or quotes their suicide statistics. Now, we talked about in the last video why they pretend not to know what a woman is. And it's because they lost the argument quite a while ago now with the fall of the Soviet Union. And now they're just riding the cultural momentum, all this institutional momentum pushing for leftism and centrality, because they don't want to adjust the intellectual argument. It's just it's coping, it's a rage, it's a denial. And now the only way to continue to live in denial is to prevent anyone from talking about the fact you're living in denial. The implications are no portraying them as a whole as groomers. Well, there's been a lot of grooming going on, and it needs to stop. You know what's worse than, say, hurting someone's feelings with words? Abusing children. It needs to be investigated. It needs to have light shine on it, and it needs to stop. No portraying tea as being a mental illness. You know, mental illness is ugly. I've got not a family, without getting in too much detail, but a by-law relative with fairly intense mental illness. When she's not on her medication, she thinks that her dead husband's talking to her. She's in another world. She needs to be treated for her mental illness. She's very unwell, and then she's fine. It's two different people. It's two different realities. You don't indulge somebody that's sick in the head. You have to help them. Anything else is absolute cruelty. And until very recently, this was considered something wrong in the head. No genocide. Denial. Well, you say 600, I say 6 million. The real number, probably somewhere in the middle, but we're not here to talk about that. Not talking about the self-harm statistics at 40%. Well, that's pretty intense and would suggest this isn't just a normal manifestation of human reproductive behavior. Something's wrong. The refusal, the denial to at least consider other alternatives that could help people that need help. That's pretty dark. Woe to those that call good evil. And you gotta love Reddit's Orwellian spin on here. Spokesperson said, Reddit is a place for creating community and belonging. Unless, of course, you disagree with some of your fundamental tenets, right? In line with this, our content policy prohibits content that promotes hate based on identity or vulnerability, including gender identity, and sexual orientation. I don't even know what you mean with half of those words. We regularly reach out to the communities on our platform to remind them of our policies and offer support. We will continue to enforce our policies across the platform. Well, what about the overwhelming majority of Americans that at least believe in some sort of spirituality, let alone the overwhelming majority of first worlders that still are followers of, Christianity? Your community is pretty selective. Your inclusive community is pretty exclusive. And when your community refuses to engage in discussion, refuses to engage in debate, and is so fragile that a single word can send people spiraling into an emotional meltdown, then your community isn't based on health, rationality, or truth, and that it's only a matter of time before another turning word emerges.